think
organised by
I think you
CP.
need to wait for the lady to talk, Stan, don't you?
I think she just said.
No, she didn't.
She did say, but that's okay. Just hold on. She did say, but we will start
Apologies.
again. Go ahead.
Okay, comrades, it's 5 o'clock on Sunday evening, so we're doing an online communist forum organised by Communist Party of Great Britain. And PC, the Provisional Central Committee, did meet today, so Jack's going to give a report on latest politics. Thank you. Carry on, Jack.
Okay, well, I'm going to begin with Tony Blair's essay. It's freely available from the Tony Blair Institute, nonetheless. It's an easy 5,700 word read. It's sort of a combination, in my opinion, of interesting and at the same time the banal. I'm sort of reminded reading it of, I don't know when and where she said it or in what context, but Mrs. Thatcher, or was she Baroness by the time? But Thatcher reportedly said at some point that her greatest achievement in terms of as a politician was Tony Blair. And I think she had a point there that who could have imagined it, that after, swinging, closures of British industry, horrendous attacks on trade union rights, the defeat of one trade union, crucially, the National Union of Miners, Tony Blair would take over the Labour Party and do nothing to reverse those attacks. He accepted the anti-trade union laws. He accepted the financialization of Britain, and indeed, before he actually became prime minister, he changed the Labour Party constitution so that they got rid of the old Fabian socialist clause 4 and replaced it with some piece of managerial whatever. So I think that remark by Thatcher is true, and certainly if you read this document, you can see Thatcher's fingerprints all over it. Okay, so I'm not going to follow the argument point by point, but I'll pick out a number of salient points, really. The first is that this isn't about personalities, that the Labour Party's problems isn't with Keir Starmer. It's not his personality. I have read some, wisecracking there that, you'd have to delve pretty far to find a personality in terms of Keir Starmer. But that one aside, it's not about personalities. It's not about Wes Streeting replacing him. It's not about Andy Burnham. Labour Party's problems would continue if you don't deal with more fundamental questions. So, for example, having a swipe at Keir Starmer, he talks about the Labour Party programme in terms of the general election and what programme they've governed on. He characterised that as a soft Labour and said, well, this is totally inadequate to the times. He has a swipe in the direction of Wes Streeting and says that, rejoining the EU, it's the wrong question at the wrong time, and makes a claim. I'm not convinced on this one, but he makes a claim that if you put it in front of focus groups, it's an all-round loser. My understanding actually is if you put it in front of a focus group, certainly in terms of opinion polls, it's still 55 maybe who are against out, as opposed to 45 that think it was the right decision. So there's sort of buyer's regret there. But he basically makes a joke and says that if you put it in front of a Church of England vicar, you'll get a thumbs up for rejoining the EU. But he basically dismisses that idea for the now. No, attempt to get a second term Labour government can be won on the basis of rejoining the EU. Makes an interesting point. I think it's a true point that there are only two big powers in the world today. The United States, obviously, and the other one's pretty obvious as well, and that's China. So he talks about a G2 system. He speculates about a G3 system. He looks at India with its 1.5 billion population. India today is the most populous country in the world. Whether that actually means that it's sort of predestined to become the third great power is another question. Nonetheless, he basically says there's two big countries. Maybe there will be a third, but it won't be Britain. So he's got no illusions there. We're not going to remake the British Empire. We're not going to go back to the 1820s. We're very much looking at things in the 2020s and looking into the future. And the best that Britain can hope for is being perhaps the most dynamic of the middle ranking powers. And basically his recipe for success, he says that the key to everything is economic growth. The key is therefore getting rid of regulations. Now, I know you can talk about planning regulations here. Maybe that's what he's got in mind, but I'm also of the view, when I heard that or when I read it, my mind instantly went to Grenfell, because we've just had, the number of prosecutions that is being talked about. I think from memory, it's something like 20 individuals, 30 companies, is it? Something like that. And, was this just unique to one block of flats where over 70 people died? Or was this something about something more general in terms of Britain? That one aside, that's one of his solutions. Get rid of red tape. How many times have we heard that one before? So get rid of rules, get rid of regulations, go for private industry. He talks about the what's the phrase? I've got it written down somewhere. It's a Keynes phrase that's a sort of substitute for profit. The animal instinct is what he's relying on. So he doesn't use the P word. He talks about basically it's a polite word, or maybe not such a polite word, for capitalist money making. So that must be encouraged. And also, as any politician would nowadays, he bungs in an awful lot of AI. And AI is going to be as important, maybe even more important than the Industrial Revolution, which not only transformed Britain, but transformed the world in the 19th and 20th century. He says that AI is going to do the same. So he talks about, well, if we're going to reintroduce industry in the North, he says, well, it will be run by AI and run by robots. That's what he's envisaging on that one, and that should be encouraged. That's basically his thesis. Anyway, having looked at, two powers, maybe three powers, what lesson does he draw from history on this one? He talks about, I think it's highly revealing phrase. He talks about how America came to the rescue of Europe in two world wars. I've heard the description of the two world wars sort of being European civil wars, and I don't think that's inaccurate. Yes, you had Japan, but nonetheless, at the core of these two world wars, you had European powers, and I'm including the Soviet Union fundamentally for the sake of the argument as a European power in this context. Anyway, you get the idea. America came to the rescue of Britain. That's really what he means. You could make the argument that the Nazis had Europe in chains. That would be true. You could also make the argument, on the other hand, that Britain had India in chains, Africa in chains. In terms of before World War I, before they sold off their assets to America, you could even talk about Latin America in that sense. It was controlled fundamentally by British imperialism. Anyway, he says that not only did America come to, I'll use our rescue in two world wars, it also stood up for us against communism in the Cold War. And the lesson is obvious, that whatever you think of Trump, however brutally Trump puts things over, however upsetting you find Trump, the lesson is obvious. You've got to stick with America. Now, I'm not sure, but I think I'm right in saying at the very least, Blair was an advocate of America being allowed to use British bases in its Iran war. And maybe, I'm not sure in terms of my memory, he was amongst those like Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage who actually advocated Britain participating in the Iran war. And that would make perfect sense from Blair's point of view, because here you are, you had someone that was, a co-protagonist against Iraq. There he was. It was, well, an American war, but with more than a symbolic British involvement. And Iraq wasn't unique. So yes, he's basically saying stick with America. And his argument is that, well, basically, however Trump puts it, however rude Vance is, for example, or however rude Hesketh is, or whoever, the fact of the matter is that Europe has had a free ride, and what you need to do is radically up, I'll call it, I'll be honest, arms spending. We're not talking about defense, arms spending. And on that basis, we need to grow our economy and then apply to rejoin Europe from a position of strength when all the Europeans look at Britain and say, what a wonderful example of a top-ranking middle power. Look at its alliance with the United States. We desperately need Britain back in to Europe. Now, worthwhile recalling why America wanted Britain in Europe. I mean, from my history books, not quite from my memory, but from my history books, we're talking about recent history. I recall not only Churchill, but Attlee having the idea of Britain being the third world power. You know, directly after World War II, Britain gets its A-bomb. Britain rebuilds its empire. It knew it was going to lose India. That was inevitable. But there were dreams of reconstructing the British Empire. You know, that was what Suez was about. That wasn't just out of nowhere. It wasn't because NASA really was Adolf Hitler number two, and that was put a stop to. And America told Britain, your future lies in Europe. And the reason why America wanted Britain in Europe is precisely to act as the Trojan horse, the block to the original ambition. I think it's still there, isn't it, in terms of the actual declarations of an ever closer union. The idea that Europe could come together and it be the third power. America was determined that that should not happen. And America's guarantee was to have its asset in Europe, and hence British prime ministers, British administrations were told your future lies in Europe. And that's, of course, exactly why General de Gaulle, I don't know how many times he said non, but again, from memory, it was something like 3, wasn't it? There were 3 attempts, if I'm not wrong, before you finally have Ted Heath getting a yes. And again, maybe I'm wrong, someone can correct me. Wasn't this after General de Gaulle? Was it after 68? I am right. Thank you, putting the thumbs up. I'm just trying to get my things right, because General de Gaulle had been weakened. This is the point. And if we look back at the events of May 1968, we should bear in mind all those troops, at least that was the talk at the time, and there's evidence of it, that de Gaulle wanted to bring troops, French troops, from West Germany, and America this time said none. America was showing its power. Anyway, the long and the short was that we need to understand what the European project was and how America managed that project using Britain. And therefore, if you think about it in terms of not just Trump, but future US administrations giving the yes to Britain, its ally, its puppet, its radically, how should I put it, subordinated European power that isn't in the EU, going into the EU, what's the purpose of it? It certainly is not to build Europe up into the third power. It's to keep Europe radically subordinate to the United States, in spite of the objective interests of Europe and European capitalism to unite and precisely constitute itself a global power. Clearly, in terms of Germany, that's an aim. Clearly, in terms of France, that's an aim. Okay. So what else does Blair say? Showing his closeness, his loyalty to the Trump program. He talks, well, he doesn't use the term drill, baby, drill, but that's his program. So the North Sea drill in terms of national insurance, encouraging the animal instinct, cut taxes on businesses, allow businesses to hire cheap labor. On the other hand, you've got to clamp down on illegal, specifically the boats. I personally think that's largely illusory. Why? Simply because there's a huge push factor in terms of the so-called global South. I can imagine the push certainly coming from present-day Iran, given their extreme poverty because of sanctions, because of the war, but also other parts of the world. But there's also a pull. All you need to do, is go around and look at what growth industries Britain has. Certainly, in terms of my, how should I put it, very subjective view, where I live in London, one of the most notable things I see is loads and loads and loads of delivery drivers, not just in little vans, but on little scooters, going backwards and forwards. And of course, when the police did have one of their big clampdowns they stopped. I mean, what percentage of them were legally resident and allowed to work in Britain? Very few. And so, you know, shops, delivery companies have all got that we want cheaper and cheaper labor. So there's not only a push factor, there's also a pull factor as far as capitalist companies are concerned. Either way, this is something that he says we have to do because obviously there's a threat to the right. He has no time for reform. He has no time, obviously, for the Greens, but he also doesn't have much time at all for not only soft labour, which he describes the present government as, but also old labour. That gets dismissed. And interestingly, from my point of view, he actually describes old labour now as being committed to the Labour Party rules that he was responsible for introducing. So there's a little phrase in the 1994 Labour Party, constitution and rules along the lines of power, wealth, and opportunity needs to be in the hands of the many and not the few. He dismisses that. So clearly he's not an egalitarian. He believes in equality, very much Mendelssohnian, if I can use such a term. He's amazingly relaxed with what Mandelson called the filthy rich. And indeed, that is the case, isn't it? Because all we need to do is look at Tony Blair, the Tony Blair Institute, who he mixes with, and he mixes, well, I was about to say with the rich and the famous, he mixes with the rich and the powerful. This is very much Tony Blair. I don't think it's an accident that Tony Blair is today, I think, if you Google it or whatever you look up, the wealth of, he's worth something like 100 million quid, which isn't a huge amount, but it is for the likes of you and me, right? How did he get it? Well, by basically being an advisor, very well connected on the world stage. So, for example, and I'll come to what's going on in the Middle East and specifically Gaza at the moment, he is a member, isn't he, of Donald Trump's Board of Peace. And that's been, you know, one of his roles. So imagine Tony Blair as a peace envoy, a solution to the crises in the Middle East. And yes, that's what he was. And that's what he is. So effectively, we need to understand Tony Blair as an agent of US power. And he is conscious of that. And whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican, that's what he's determined to do. So his recipe basically for Britain and, making it a dynamic economy is further subordination to the United States. His basic criticism is Britain hasn't been fast enough to catch up with the United States, and not only the Republican agenda of Bush, but also the agenda of Democrats, and that's his argument in his essay. So, as I say, he doesn't have any time for soft labor, but neither does he have time for old labor. He also dismisses blue labor. And I did hear him being interviewed after this essay was published on BBC Radio 4, and he almost said he didn't have much time for labor. He didn't quite come out with that phrase. And I think it was with Nick Robinson, former Conservative candidate, does in-depth half-hour interviews with political personalities. And Blair made the point in that interview, just repeating what we all know, that for Blair, the great historical tragedy of British politics is the cleaving of the great Liberal Party of Gladstone. And then he isn't referring to the Irish and the breakaway of the Irish side of that grand coalition. Specifically, what he refers to is the cleavage between the Labour side, and what we're talking about is the trade unions and liberalism. It's true that politically, Labourism quite rightly should be described as lib-labism. There was no difference politically between the Liberal Party fundamentally and the Labour Party. The first Labour government, for example, had Liberal ministers and would take its foreign policy in front of both other parties. It was determined to show its responsibility, but for Blair, that was a historic tragedy. And therefore, what his project is what he calls the radical centre. And what he means by radicalism is very much, as I say, being pro-business, anti-welfare payments, radically loyal to the United States. He wants to break the triple lock for pensioners. He wants to clamp down and force young people into work. How you do it, I don't know. But what he doesn't address is, if you actually look at the modern British economy, it's a point we've repeated and repeated and repeated. If you look at what Britain is now, fundamentally what it is the city of London. And around that, there's London, and around that, there's the Southeast. And from that, stock exchanges, legal fees, handling money, what you get is tax revenue. And an awful lot of what Britain survives on is either selling off assets, but it's fundamentally the city. And of course, when we read left-wing solutions, and I include Burnham just about in that, and they come out with phrases like tax the rich, the flaw with that is obvious, and that is that this money is hot money, liquid money. It's not investments in producing things. It's money that can be moved from one realm to another realm, literally at the press of a button, or actually quicker than that, by computers, which operate on the basis of nanosecond. So, for example, just to illustrate that, for computer trading, it actually matters whether your computer is based near London, your computer center near London, because it gives you that just fraction of a second, nanosecond advantage over people whose computer centers are further away from London. So in other words, what we're dealing with is a privileged position, of course, that's allowed by the United States, but it's also an extremely vulnerable position. And that's precisely the problem with not only reformist, but left-wing critiques of where Britain is at the present time, and why we put forward in terms of a strategy, not Britain as our starting point, not Scotland, certainly Wales, or no, it's a European dimension that we're looking to in terms of the socialist project. Okay. So if anyone else has read the Tony Blair document and want to put forward their observations, I'll be very interested in that. Just a final point, which I think is a sort of truth, and don't want to overdo it in the Blair document, and that is his observation about what you might call traditional bases. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but they've been completely eroded. So he talks about Labour taking Labour voters for granted, and he says you can't do that anymore, in the same way that the Tories can't do that anymore. And all I would add to that is, well, one man, if you wanted to name one man who's responsible for that, I would pick out Tony Blair. I'm not saying he is, but if I wanted to name just one individual, it's precisely Tony Blair, who's done the most of any individual to erode Labour's class base. I still think Labour's a class party, but it's highly attenuated, it's highly vulnerable, partially to the right, but actually, I think in terms of, for example, the local government vote, much more actually to the Greens. Anyway, I'll finish with that one. I'll now turn to Romania, not Romanian politics as such, but the drone strike, which is being blamed on Russia. What came to my mind, having just completed yet another article that we titled Notes on the War, what came to my mind when I heard this news is I went, I'm sure it's a Russian drone. Putin says, well, you haven't proved it. I think you can prove it, because we're dealing with not, we're not dealing with drones that cause such a massive amount of destruction that they leave nothing behind. There will be plenty of fragments of this drone. They will be, sifted through by NATO, I don't know who else, but by various, forensic experts. And there you'll have a little bit of a Shahed, or I think they call them Gremlins or something like that, Gremlin 2s in Russia. You'll be able to prove it. That's really my point. But my mind instantly went, not, this is a Ukrainian drone. That would have to go radically wrong. That would have to go west. I think that would be too much. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just weighing up the likelihood. So my take on it is that this was near the border with Ukraine. And my mind instantly went to this Lima system, which I'd been writing about in the Weekly Worker. This is being sold in terms of the Western sort of defense commentators as Ukraine's cheap version for not getting American Patriots. American Patriot missiles are amazingly effective, but amazingly expensive. I'm not saying they hit 100% of their targets, but these missiles are designed to hit missiles, not drones. Drones are sort of chonka, 150 miles an hour, maybe 200 miles an hour. So they are chonk. Patriots are designed to knock out missiles, which, again, according to my article, I've got no reason to question myself because I looked it up. A conventional ballistic missile goes at 20 times the speed of sound. I don't know how many thousand miles an hour that is. You can work it out yourself. It's not difficult. This is opposed to these hypersonic, which you would have thought in terms of the name would go even faster. But no, hypersonic missiles are not out into space and down. They're in the atmosphere, and their advantage is that they can zigzag, and not zigzag on some predictable course, but on an unpredictable course. Either way, this Lima system is capable of interfering with satellite messages, not only to drones, but also ballistic missiles. And again, I'm not an expert here, but having written about the British Storm Shadow missiles that have been supplied to Ukraine, my understanding about Storm Shadows, for example, is that they have 3 navigation systems. They have a pre-programmed navigation system. You sit there with your computer or your laptop and you say, this is the target I want you to hit. They also have a satellite function, and they also have a ground recognition navigation system built into them. And what this Lima system, and I'm guessing that Russia has something similar to it, it doesn't make these missiles and drones blind, but it takes away the super accuracy of satellite messages, and it can actually interfere with those messages and put them off course. And so we're talking not doing a U-turn, although I have heard that you could have done that in the past. But what we're talking about is putting them off by a few degrees here and there. And anyway, that is my explanation as a possibility. I'm putting it no stronger than that. So in other words, the story could be, which wouldn't go down so well, that this Russian drone was actually redirected, not deliberately by the Ukrainians in order to land on Romania, but accidentally. There you are, you're trying to interfere with this swarm of drones coming towards you. You put off these jamming signals and these other signals to redirect it, and boom. But of course, what it's had, it's triggered outrage in Europe. And again, the message comes over loud and clear that what we need is more arms spending. Again, a comment on that. What is amazing, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, but I sort of I continuously am, is the speed of the revolution that's taking place in warfare at the present time. I mean, what the Ukraine war has shown is basically that the old model of tanks and aircraft is out of date. That's dodo territory. We saw that with the armored column of Russian tanks coming down towards Kiev and how that was blasted. We also saw it with the first Ukrainian offensive to the south that we were told, I was very skeptical, we were told that Ukrainian soldiers would be calling their feet on the, in the Black Sea. Personally, having looked at the satellite pictures of 3 lines of defenses that the Russians had put in place, with dragon's teeth, tank traps, trenches, kill zones. And of course, what happened? I mean, I'm no military genius. What happened is that they lost loads of Abrahams, loads of Leopard tanks, loads of men. And I think they penetrated first line of defense somewhere, and then were thrown back, and it was ended in humiliation and disaster. And so we had the sort of recreation of World War I, but not World War I, with trench warfare. And that itself has now been overthrown with this ubiquity of drones, so that the trenches are no longer manned. We had the story, I can't remember how many days we had this poor bugger in. I think I was quoting last week, 90 days. I looked it up for the purposes of my article. Some poor bugger, Ukrainian bugger, was actually in his foxhole for over 200 days. He was trapped, in terms of not being able to be rescued. And of course, when they got him out, he was suffering from muscle wastage and stuff like that. But the long and the short of it is, it's extraordinarily difficult to rotate troops. Why? Because you've got to get them in and you've got to get them out. And you get them out basically by ducking and diving, and you're under observation and therefore under fire from drones. And even when you meet your car, your armored car, X miles or X kilometers down the road, you're still vulnerable to drones. So most troops now are lost, not in the trenches, not through direct attacks, but are actually lost in terms of this rotation of troops on the front line. Anyway, that's my point about that. And also the point I wanted to get to here is the danger, as far as I see it, in terms of this, we've got to upgrade our arms spending, is that almost certainly what they will be upgrading their arms spending for will be out of date by the time they actually hand it over to troops, NATO troops. So rapid is the change. So I quoted, for example, in my latest article, attack drones. Again, I was stunned about the price of them. Something between $1,000 and $2,000. And you go, well, what's that? Well, compared with what drones used to cost, when America, for example, was first introducing drone warfare into Afghanistan, you were talking about drones that cost 10 million, 20 million, $30 million a piece. And now you have attack drones that chase after other drones for a few thousand dollars. And again, final irony there. I know I've quoted it before, but I think it's still worthwhile. An awful lot, most of the chips that both sides are using in their drones are supplied courtesy of China. For China, it's good business. I'm not going to go into anything about China's nature. Okay, preparing for this talk, which obviously I delivered to the PCC, and we had a discussion about this. I wrote down, better hold things here. Trump, final determination. Trump goes to the Situation Room. And I'm going, what the hell's going to happen? I mean, I hadn't got a clue. I was very skeptical about him coming out with the equivalent of a piece of paper. I have a deal. It's going to be peace in our time. We've arrived at a settlement with the supreme leader, and we've both agreed that we're going to take off sanctions, and we're all going to become buddies, and we're going to solve the problems. I was very skeptical on that. And so, you know, I was then expecting, precisely because it's the Situation Room, maybe another term for the Situation Room, if you look at pictures of it, this is where, remember, this is the room where you had, the Trump's inner circle running the Iran war, shock and awe. All these Israeli and American strikes in Iran, they were looking at on TVs and computers precisely in the Situation Room. So my own take on it was, well, I don't think it's going to be peace. Maybe it's going to be peace. I don't know. Or maybe it's going to be war. But Trump is going to make his final determination there. And I'm still none the wiser. And maybe, well, that is significant in and of itself. Maybe this is part of, negotiating tactics. I'm going to scare the shit out of you and force you to make an extra concession by saying, I'm going away to the Situation Room, and that's meant to get people trembling. Well, if that was the case, then Iran called Trump's bluff and he produced nothing. Now, my own take on it is that's a highly risky business. A bit like, crying wolf. Cry wolf once, cry wolf twice. Third time, the wolf might be real and might be out to eat you. In other words, you can call Trump's bluff, but he's still, and rest assured, he does have the ability to order, horrendous levels of further destruction on Iran. Anyone who talks about, oh, America's run out of tomahawks, or this is all nonsense. America still has unsurpassed military capability and can inflict huge damage on Iran. The question is, though, that can that produce regime change? And my own conviction always has been no. You can bomb. You cannot produce regime change from 20,000 feet. You can have people inside the regime. I mean, we've talked about Ahmadinejad. I don't know whether that's true. We know what happened in Venezuela. But either way, you either have to have the regime itself willing to bow the knee, and you can call that regime change, or you have to have an alternative regime ready, armed. There isn't one. Or the third option is the Iraq option, and that's to have boots on the ground. And you'd need a lot of boots on the ground, not only to overthrow the regime, but then to hold the country. Iraq, America didn't make the commitment to hold Iraq and basically pulled out. I always remember the British pulling out of Basra. Iran is a vastly bigger and more populous country. And for what it's worth, and it isn't worth very much when I say it, but I do think that the regime has a base in Iran, the Revolutionary Guard, the Basiji, maybe, be very interested to see what Yasmin says on this one, maybe still the Bazari, I don't know, I'm not going to risk that one. Worth noting, and Yasmin will be writing an article about it this week, that we also have the end of the internet blackout in Iran. So we've actually got a basis now of being able to come to some sort of judgment about what ordinary Iranians think. We can ask them, as opposed to people operating in Los Angeles or robots operating out of Los Angeles. And we're talking about royalist or MEK bots or whatever it happens to be. I've mentioned Gaza, of course, in the context of Tony Blair, a member of Trump's Board of Peace, God help us. And of course, what we have, no surprise to me, and surely no one surprised here, who's participating in this online communist forum, of the latest changes in Gaza, of where we no longer have a yellow line. This is the division of Gaza, where you have an Israeli zone along the Israeli border and in the north. And if you are a Palestinian and you go anywhere near the yellow line, you have a very good chance of you being shot, killed by a drone, or attacked by a fighter aircraft. So a load of Palestinians have died, not because they've crossed that line, but because they've got too near that line. And of course, what we've seen is the replacement of the yellow line, which is 53% of Gaza under the control of the Israelis. And we've seen the extension of it and the drawing of an orange line, which give Israel, depending on how you calculate these things, I've seen the satellite pictures and there's someone drawing a line, not a mathematically precise figure, but nonetheless between 58% and 60% of Gaza now is under direct Israeli control. And of course, what we have is Netanyahu saying he wants that extended. He's not satisfied that 60% gives him a security guarantee, and therefore he wants 70%. And we also have Israeli Katz, the defense minister. They call it defense. I think America's more honest war minister, calling for the expulsion of the Palestinian population in Gaza. That's no surprise to me. To me, if we look at Israel's original war aims, I mean, my own response was, well, that's not really their war aims, to eliminate Hamas. That was one of their war aims. Well, you're not going to eliminate Hamas. If you expel every last Palestinian from Gaza, you're not going to eliminate Hamas. Where you expel them to, Hamas will organize. Hamas is organized on the West Bank. Hamas is organized in refugee camps. Where you've got Palestinians, you'll have Hamas. It's a political movement. It's viewed, as a national resistance movement. And we can, it's clearly a political party that's rooted ideologically amongst the masses. It's the Palestinian branch of, historically, the Muslim Brotherhood. That's what it is. You can't just shoot them, assassinate them. They've killed the latest military leader of Hamas. Well, replace them with the deputy or the deputy of the deputy of the deputy. It's just how it goes. It's like you can kill the supreme leader, you appoint a new supreme leader. Okay, so the question to me is, well, where are the Palestinians going to go? And we've heard about Somaliland. Well, many people have heard of Somaliland for the first time. One of these unofficial breakaways from Somalia, which had its breakdown and civil war, and here's an enclave. Well, I think the only official recognition that it's got, from my memory, I could be wrong, is Israel. Maybe somewhere in like Micronesia maybe recognizes it. I don't know. Either way, what we're talking about is a dumping ground. From my angle, I could imagine Israel trying to force the Palestinians over the border into Egypt. At the same time, I can imagine the order being given by Sisi to shoot Palestinians if they cross the line. I don't know whether that's true, but Egypt, the government, shows no signs of wanting a Palestinian problem, and why solve Israel's Palestinian problem for it? Either way, I would simply say that for those on the left that don't think the Palestinians have been defeated, there's a truth there. Of course, they continue to exist, they continue to resist, but this isn't a victorious people. This is a people who are being hammered, a people whose very existence is in danger. I mean, they're in the same sort of situation as the Aboriginal population in Australia. Maybe they're facing their Tasmanian moment. I don't know if there were any survivors of the genocide of the Tasmanian Aborigines, maybe one, maybe two, but settlers destroyed them. Or if you look at the United States, the destruction of the native population through disease, deliberately introduced disease, moving people from their land, forcing people into bad areas, where they weren't accustomed to, basically destroying them as a people. So what you have left in the United States is a remnant, a shadow of a people. So that's how it strikes me at the moment. And just to make a comment on Ben-Gvir and the treatment, the fact that the Israelis went out and treated Westerners in front of cameras in this way tells you everything about how Palestinians are being treated, in prisons, on the West Bank, in Gaza. Israel is acting precisely as if there are no consequences. And of course, effectively, that is the case. Why? Because Israel is protected by the US hegemon. And for all the crocodile tears that we get from Western politicians, the fact of the matter is that while they retain their alliance with the United States, they are complicit. And note that if you take the Board of Peace, it gave its approval for the yellow line to become the orange line. And the idea that the Board of Peace is going to redevelop Gaza for the benefit of the Palestinians, you couldn't get a sicker joke, could you? This is like, well, the only reason why British and the colonial authorities cleared out Tasmanian Aborigines is to make life better for them. Well, clearly it's an absurdity. And of course, what's going on today in Gaza is only going to be repeated, maybe in a different way, but it's going to be repeated on the West Bank. Final point on this: at the beginning of this war, we did have those telling us, I was always firmly in the other camp, rejecting that idea. Israel cannot afford to stay at war. Here's a country with a small population, You know, it's a conscript army. Yes, it has a professional army, but here it is. It's reliant on a conscript army, and it will just cost it too much economically to keep this war going. Well, nothing could be further from the truth, because if you look at the Netanyahu government, it clearly is determined to carry on the war, not only against the Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza, but is determined to carry on its war and extend its zone of occupation in Lebanon, meanwhile extending its area of control in Syria. So we have the Golan Heights, which was originally seized as a security guarantee, itself creating. We have to have a buffer zone to protect the Golan Heights. Every buffer zone produces a new buffer zone. And of course, as Moshe Machover has argued, and I would agree with it, that what we're dealing with here isn't just, you know, Israel Katz or Ben Gvir or crazy Netanyahu, who's just hanging on as prime minister. What we're dealing with is the political economy of Zionism, right? That's why I quoted the United States and Australia, because here you had what I think Kautsky talked about being a work colony or an exploitation colony, of where you don't want the native population. It's your colonists that are going to supply all classes in the future society. So the bourgeoisie, the unemployed, the workers, the farmers, all of those classes are going to be accounted for by incomers. And at the very best, you leave the original native population on the extreme margins, or you just exterminate them, either through them drinking to death, taking drugs, or killing them off. This is the political economy of Zionism. And of course, no doubt, if there's a Daily Telegraph writer on this call, they will accuse me of being anti-Semitic. No, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm against Zionism in the same way that if you're opposed to apartheid in South Africa, didn't make you anti-white. It's a stupid idea, but we know the purpose of the big lie is to close down criticism of the genocide that Israel is presiding over, or the ethnic cleansing that Israel is presiding over, while the Western civilization does nothing apart from shed a few crocodile tears. Okay. Okay. Last, how much time have I got? 2 minutes by my own schedule. We will have an article on it. I cannot resist the temptation to comment on Scotland. And of course, what I'm talking about is the trial of Peter Morrell, former chief executive of the Scottish Nationalist Party, former partner of the former First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon. And just like the rest of the media, I have to say, the list of items that Peter, I'm the man with the money, purchased, just leave me sort of scratching my head. Maybe I'm a strange person, I don't know. But the idea of myself purchasing a crystal salt grinder for, what is it, 2000? I've got a salt grinder upstairs. It grinds salt. It's perfectly adequate for my purposes. I can't imagine a situation that me and my partner go upstairs and have a meal, and there she looks at the salt grinder and goes, "There you are, Jack. That's a wonderful salt grinder. How much did that cost you?" "Oh, nothing. Just a few £1,000s. And then we get into the 3 coffee machines. I've been told by comrades they have coffee machines. Personally, I drink, it's just me, I drink coffee so rarely. I looked at the price of these damn things and went, oh, 2003. No, I can't be bothered. Either way, if you're a coffee aficionado, fair enough. Get your coffee machine and have your espresso and your whatever. You press this button, and maybe, you know, if you're into technology, okay. But 3 of them. Why do you need 3 coffee machines? And then we have the bookshelves. Well, you can look at my bookshelves. I can notice Mike McNair's got some very flashy bookshelves behind his picture there. But I'm sort of left still in this. Why? Again, I know men. I mean, I don't wear a watch anymore. I don't need one. I've got, you know, one of these things, and I'm usually in front of a computer, you know. But I know men don't wear jewelry usually in our culture, and therefore to show off their wealth, you know. I'm not tuned into looking at watches and going, oh, that's really worth a lot. I can't spot the difference. But if you're inside that bubble, you know the difference between a Rolex that costs £20,000 maybe, and I don't know, a fake Rolex. I don't know. Anyway, I do read the FT occasionally at the weekend, and what used to be called How to Spend It. And they don't bother with prices in that. They're so expensive, and you're meant to be so rich when you're looking at a yacht for sale or a watch that you go, oh, I'll have that. And because it costs $500,000, you go, oh, just have that. Peter Morrell has 5, not watches to tell the time, but 5 man watches. This is about how much they cost, sort of type watches. Again, I know that men do go in for, some men go in for 5. So maybe they go out and people notice they've got a different watch on. Okay, fair enough. I know it's true that he did go, you know, real expensive, not just pedants for Nicola, but there's a camper van and a Jag. That's not cheap. But again, I just go, well, yeah. Nowadays, as I understand it, I'm not a car owner myself or a car hirer. Nowadays, my understanding is most cars come, you know, through rental agreements. It used to be called HP. So the fact that Peter turns up, you know, one evening to the family house, and he's in a Jag, and Nicola looks out and says, "Oh, a new car." I don't know whether it's true or not that she knew nothing about it. Maybe it reveals a very uninquiring mind. Apparently, they didn't go on flashy holidays. You know, their house seems to be quite modest to me. There she is posing in front of her bookcase, you know, for the press cameras with a book in hand. I like books, but it still strikes me as, you know, retail therapy. And I don't know if I was the defense attorney in this particular case, who is meant to be on the left, as I understand it, my own take on it would be, knowing nothing about Peter, nothing about his background, I would have gone in for something along the lines of, you know, he's under extreme stress. The marriage was always shaky. And in order to show off to his wife, he went, and to sort of reassure himself, he went in for retail therapy. I don't know. When it comes to sentencing, maybe that will be the line of argument. But I'll make this final point, that I don't think that he's unique. And although, you know, the corruption did have its unique side, i.e. this was directly from SNP funds, look at these Labour would-be ministers under Keir Starmer, would-be, and then when they became ministers, look at all the freebies they were being given. Now, this isn't them, you know, surreptitiously, it's them accepting bribes. This is what they're, so David Lammy's suits was a freebie. There's Angela Rayner with concerts, with holidays. Now, why do extremely rich people give ministers or would-be ministers free holidays? Well, maybe I've got a suspicious mind. Sorry, I call that corruption. Okay, you know, it's of a different sort of type to Peter Morrell, but we've had all of this stuff about Peter Morrell And I think there are questions there about, you know, the culture of the SNP. But what about this freebie culture that was? What about Tony Blair and his 100 million? Where did he get this 100 million from? Why was he a millionaire almost as soon, a multi-millionaire, almost as soon as he leaves office? You know, that is corruption. And then all we need to do is look over the Atlantic. And if you're talking about serious money, and we're not talking about millions, we're talking about billions, then look at the Trump administration and what it's getting away with now. And what we're dealing with is something, in my estimate, when it comes to America, something of the level of corruption that we saw as the norm in British politics, you know, in the 17th, 18th century. And you know, before the rise of the working class as a serious opposition force. And then you have to have politicians inventing themselves as I'm a man or I'm a woman of the people and all the rest of it. And I think precisely class politics is being eroded. And in that sense, what we have is the replacement of politicians from the aristocracy with politicians who are in politics as a career, who view getting freebies, who view becoming rich after they've left office as part of the career structure itself. So this isn't an extra, this is their actual reward for denying themselves for so long on mere salaries such as Nicola Sturgeon. What was she on? £100,000, something like that. For that self-denial, she would be looking forward to earning real money after office. I don't know whether she will. She's claiming at the moment not to know anything about it. She's claiming this is the sin of men. I can't see how it's just the sin of men. To me, this is the sin of professional politicians. And so it takes different forms with different parties and with different individuals. But I think it's the same problem. And of course, this isn't something just about Blair. All we need to do is look at Nigel Farage, again, a man of the people, with his 5 million from a Malaysian, is it a Malaysian crypto operator? Why did you give Nigel 5 million? What do you, I mean, you have to ask, what do you expect in return? And we sort of know what he expects in return. Why is Nigel so, I should put it, circumspect about owning up on this question? And I think he is. That's because he's got something to hide. Anyway, I'm going to finish with that. Thank you, Stan. So I've overrun a little bit, but hopefully it was worth it.
Thanks, Jack. Okay, comrades, you know what's happening now. We're going to have hands up. If you can do a computer hand up, a Zoom hand up. There you go. There's Jim Nelson. And if you're an attendant and not a panelist, then you won't be able to speak. So if you want to speak, transfer and become a panelist. Ask to be transferred. So it's Jim first and then Ken.
Well, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. I'll try and keep it going a bit. Tony Blair, I haven't read his piece, and I will not. Life's too short. But I have seen the headlines, of course, like everybody else, and skimmed some of the stories. And one of his proudest things is he won 3 elections. Of course, as some of the older comrades here, of which there's 1 or 2, will remember, the reason he won such a huge majority in '97 wasn't because everybody was singing things can only get better. It was because the Tories collapsed. The Labour vote went up about 2 million then. The Conservative vote went down about 4.5 million in that election. In 2001, the Tories lost another million. And that's when they were messing around with Hague and Ian Duncan Smith and Michael Howard, I suppose. Labour lost 3 million in his second election, lost 3 million. And that's before Iraq. And then 2005, the Tories pulled back another 500,000 and Labour lost yet another million. In fact, the turnouts were something that hadn't been seen since women got the vote. And Labour didn't really recover the number of votes until Corbyn, of course, in 2017. So that's his proud boast about that. People were sick of the Tories in part because of what they'd done. Thatcher, and Jack was saying about Thatcher deindustrialising and so on. I remember at the time, serious economists in the bourgeois press were saying, you do not use capital as revenue, which of course is what she was doing. She slashed taxes, especially for the rich, but then flogging off water and gas and electric and the rest. It's precisely that, using capital as revenue. And one of the things Jack was saying about, quoting Blair, that AI, Britain needs to leap ahead with AI. Of course, in Britain, as everywhere else, there are people saying, what about our drinking water? What about our electricity? And so on and so on and so on. One of the things that strikes me is that if Britain develops anything really fantastic in AI, it'll be bought by the Americans anyway, won't it? And that'll be it. Gone. So Tony Blair is to a large extent a fantasist. I mean, he said in the Observer today, he's interviewed, he's saying something like he doesn't belong to the tech brothers. Of course, no, he doesn't need to. He says what they want to hear, and they hear what they want to hear. He may be totally honest and so on about it, but he fits in. On unemployment, there's a lot about that at the moment. This youth unemployment, the number of NEETs going over 1 million and stuff like that, not in education, employment, or whatever it is. But I was unemployed for a while, a few years back in the 90s. And from my experience and the experience of the people I met then, the reason for unemployment is there aren't any jobs. I remember talking to a bloke who was a painter, and he said, you know, we were on this course. We had to go on to keep our money coming in. And he said, to get a job, he just goes to his pub. He just keeps going to his pub, because that's where he will hear about work, not in the Labour Exchange or whatever, but at the pub. Doesn't have to be the pub, but to get work, you have to hear about it, and a lot of that is a matter of luck, isn't it? There's another thing on the last point Jack was talking about, wealth. When I was a lad, inheritance tax was very high, and the old lords and ladies, when they were dying, their offspring would sell a Rembrandt or something like that against tax, and it would go to the British Museum or the National Portrait Gallery or something like that, occasionally to the Guggenheim. I've noticed over the decades that these things don't go to museums like that and so on anymore. They go to people who, it costs 5 million, is that all? That looked nice on the living room wall, and so on and so on. And I think the same applies to politicians. Is that all? 5 million or 1 million or less? For these people, it's small change, isn't it? It's nothing compared with, for instance, the tax they no longer have to pay, even a few years ago, let alone decades ago. That's it. Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Jim. Ken, go ahead. Then we got Paul, Pamela, John, Smithy, Ben. Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jack. A couple of points. One on Iran. The reports, I think it was the 1 o'clock news on BBC, that Trump has made amendments to this agreement that was under debate, and these are being sent back to the Iranians for comment. Now, it begs the question as to how long Trump, or indeed the Iranians, can or would wish to spin out this negotiation, if that's what you can describe it as, for. I mean, Trump has got the midterm elections to consider. Does he imagine that he can spin out this extended negotiation until November? I doubt it. Would it be a benefit to him to get a resolution sooner or further away from the midterms? I don't know. I don't even know if any resolution is possible to this. His special military operation in Iran may not quite drag on to the 5 years that Putin's special military operation has achieved, if that's the word. But, how much longer does he think he can usefully spin this out? Presumably well, there are a number of reasons why he might wish to extend the negotiations. Netanyahu's reportedly making representations to him that he doesn't quite want to stop destroying Lebanon yet. And Trump is also getting a certain amount of flack from other Republicans who question the usefulness of what he's done in Iran and the extent to which anything he might achieve would be in advance. So it's an interesting question, but to which I do not know the answer as to how long this process will be dragged out. What is he waiting for? An opportunity to resume bombing? Something else to happen? Don't know. The second point is with reference to the Nick Robinson, Tony Blair interview that Jack referenced. At one point in that interview, I thought Tony Blair came very close to saying vote Conservative. He didn't say that quite, but he was sort of edging towards that and then stepped back. Is it possible that Blair, in the run-up to the next election, might endorse Badenoch? And if so, would that actually be the final nail in the Tory party's coffin? I don't know. But Blair certainly seemed, in the statements he was making in the interview and in what has been reported about the essay, which I haven't personally read, his position seemed very close to what Badenoch has been saying recently. So is Blair edging towards support of the Conservative Party? An interesting hypothetical question, and we might find out the answer in the next month or so, but that's it. Thanks.
Well, he is the product of Thatcher, after all. So there you are. Is that a change? Paul, go ahead.
All right. Right. Okay. Now, very briefly on the Moral affair. He's got about as much hair as I have, and I haven't used a hairdryer in 40 years, and he bought 3 of them. So there's something very strange going on. But what's it just said about what Ken just said about Blair and similarity to the Tories? I think that what's come across to me was that he just seemed to come across like not so much Badenoch, but Cameron. In other words, a economically classic sort of modern Tory, privatisation and all the rest of it, but with a sort of a liberal glaze to it. He did seem to. I must admit, I haven't read the speech. I've only seen chunks of it quoted, but he does seem to eschew the sort of hardline culture wars side of it. He's downplaying that bit as if that's embarrassing. It doesn't help to get support behind you from more liberal type of people. What is basically there is he's going for sort of a liberal Tory kind of approach. Now the thing is that possible these days? I mean, why was it that Cameron was replaced by a harder liner with May, who still had that sort of a bit of a veneer of liberalism about her, or liberal, socially liberal, and then more and more conservative. So still you've got a sort of a self-parody of Badenoch today, who only comes across as anywhere half literate because she's got an even worse opponent across the aisle in the House of Commons. There's also with Blair this real tin ear to the disasters that the foreign policy of America, basically of US foreign policy, Western foreign policy, since the end of the Cold War. I mean, this one of the most astonishing things has been the incoherence of US policy, even under more sort of or less unintelligent US presidents. They just don't seem to have any coherence about them. The Cold War gave coherence to bourgeois policies, especially in the foreign policy field. And without that side of the, I always see the Cold War balance as some kind of like an arch like this, and if one side goes, like the Soviet Union did, just crumbles, the other side's left dangling. You can't have an arch left dangling, it tends to fall down. And that's exactly what's happened. And if you look at American foreign policy, and this is the thing which Blair was so hot on, it's been one disaster after another and doesn't seem to be getting any better. And I mean, okay, Trump has added almost surreal aspects to it with this war on Iran. But even if he gets replaced by a less mercurial president, whether a Republican or Democrat, I still think we're going to see incoherence and a further string of disasters. And Blair seems to be utterly sort of unconcerned with the consequences of this. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, perhaps that's why he apologised for what he did with the Iraq War. Did he? It's not in the statement, is it? Pam, go ahead.
All right, thank you. No, I don't think he apologised, Stan. Okay, right. So today, okay. So I just put my hand down. Right. Today I went to a Your Party meeting of those from the grassroots left who are trying to salvage something from the left of the Your Party debacle. And they decided to call it the Socialist Federation. So the whole of the first bit was deciding whether they wanted a network or a federation. But they decided on this structure before a discussion on any sort of program, which was a bit strange, and it should have been the other way around. Anyway, unfortunately, I didn't stay to the end, so I'm not quite sure what happened then. But so Ian Spencer put forward a policy of supporting the democratic socialists, which are based on the American democratic socialists. There was a whole range of sort of social democrats and Marxist type groups. There was only just over about 110 people there of this national Zoom meeting, which was a precursor to a national conference coming up sometime. So there's not very many really, considering what's been going on. So we've got this socialist federation now, so at least they've got a structure going forward. But of course, the big debates will be about program and what sort of program is going to be adopted. So another issue is what's happening to the Palestine movement and the campaign for BDS. So you had a big demonstration on last Saturday was it Saturday before? What's the date today? On the 16th anyway, of the Nakba. But there's no sort of program come out of it. And in my neck of the woods, there is a hung council, but now the Greens have united with the Liberal Democrats to form a majority an official majority council, leaving Labour as the main opposition. And one of the big issues is Palestine. Are the Greens going to force through proper divestment from the local government pension scheme, which has got over 12 billion pounds invested nationally in companies invested with Israel? And the criticisms of the Palestine solidarity movement. So as the PSC, I think the main problem is that the PSC is a single issue organization. It's a charity. It can't really be political, but I think the biggest weakness is that it does not set its analysis as part of an anti-imperialist perspective. And therefore, it just presenting Palestine as a single issue is crazy, because Israel can only exist because of the support of America, and prior to America, the support of Britain. As we all know, that is entirely dependent on the support of the big powers. So, I'm not quite sure how we should proceed to critique Palestine solidarity, or if we should, or the main thing then seems to be boiling down to how effectively we campaign for BDS in order to isolate Israel. And although Israel is busily isolating itself, especially as John pointed out, the treatment of the flotilla people, the torture, and the fact that the UN has now said that Israel is on the list of countries which are using sexual abuse as part of their torture, and the other countries which are included in that Hamas and various other very unsavory regimes. But the struggle for Palestine is, it seems to me it's getting more crucial. For instance, in the health service, Wes Streeting was organizing the use of the IHRA to stop Palestinian nurses and doctors and health workers supporting Palestine, and the ongoing crucifixion of the Palestine Action people. So it's reaching a crisis point in some ways, but on the other hand, there's complete inaction from any power because they don't want to cross Trump. They don't want to be subject to sanctions or being lifted up from Venezuela or anything by the US. And it seems to be a stalemate there. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. John Smithy, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, nice and clear.
Regarding Tony Blair, Larry Ellison, the founder and owner of Oracle, has invested at least $250 million in the Tony Blair Institute. Tony Blair is just a front man for this Oracle organization, going into 40 countries to sell this Oracle's AI products. I was watching Professor Richard Murphy, who's an economist and accountant at Sheffield University. And he said that the key thing why Tony Blair has embraced neoliberalism goes back to Tony Blair's experience of having to go to boarding school at Fates, which is the Scottish equivalent of Eton, that this experience made him very insecure, and he's been after love ever since. And this is why he's gone to all these rich people who he thinks are gonna love him, and that's why he's gone to this neoliberalism. I gather that there's several things that Tony Blair has said. He wants to stop illegal immigration by any means necessary. He wants to take away legislation on workers' rights to give business confidence. He wants to scrap net zero commitments and reopen the North Sea oil and gas fields. He wants to let AI rip without regulation, recognizing that AI has changed everything. He wants to abandon the fair principles of the NHS and have private firms run rampant. He's uncritically supported Trump's foreign policy, Britain being weak on Iran, he thinks. He rejects progressive proposals, even from West Street, and for equalising income tax and capital gains tax. And he wants to work with the Tories to slash welfare and end the triple lock on pensions. I think Tony Blair, although he sees himself as some kind of de Gaulle who'll come back and save the nation, I think he's irrelevant. More importantly is Alan Milburn's report on needs, not in employment and educational training. The 1.2 million people aged 16 to 24 who are either economically inactive, i.e. on sickness benefits due to mental illness, or the 43% who are unemployed. That's more important than anything that Blair says about why we should go in with the Americans. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Ben Cusson, please. Go ahead, Ben. Still muted.
Mute on the blue bit.
There you are.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Davey is quite right to answer Ken's initial question. Trump is furiously gerrymandering everything he can get his hands on. And I think that seems to assuage his worry. Something that worries me at least as much is the propaganda for, I suppose my ugly mug can now be seen. Yes, sort of.
There you are, Ben.
Thanks for the reminder. British war policy and propaganda seems in deep contradiction. The propaganda, pure propaganda side is gloating at the difficulties of Putin's war or special military operation. And on the other hand, we're being nagged to push the Labour government into eventually getting a defence policy and related procurement. I'm sure Jack is right in saying it'll be obsolete before the troops get it. But that point doesn't yet address the issue of what British policy should be in respect of Russia versus Ukraine. It seems to me that maybe I've been very lazy in reading CPGB bulletins. Nothing seems to have appeared on what we would wish a British government to look to. For example, reducing international tension by putting points to the Russians. One particular point I would like to see discussed is the 4 oblasti, are they, or guberni in the Donbass. Their self-determination was quite a high point in Russian propaganda from 2014 onwards. And I think it would be useful to discuss that issue, if only as a means, hopefully, of reducing tension. I don't want to go deep into what my understanding of diplomacy is, because actually it's very shallow. But I would very much like to hear CPGB, PCC reactions to what I understand to be considerable omission on the part of your or our reflections on that rather important point. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Now we've got Mike McNair, then Yasemin. So go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just a few points. One of which I can't remember who it was made the point that Blair is could Blair be calling for a Conservative vote? The Times has Kemi Badenoch little article on what Blair is preaching in this letter to the Labour Party is conservatism, straightforwardly is conservatism. Why don't you come and join the Conservative Party? In this sense, I think actually it would be perfectly legit for Labour Party people to say, hey, Tony, why don't you go and join the Conservative Party? I don't think, however, that it's particularly useful. John Smithy made the point, this is something to do with Blair's childhood and being sent to FETS, which is the Scots equivalent of Eton. Well, yes or no. As far as I can see, the man's a pure careerist. I have probably said this in one of these meetings before. He's more or less exact contemporary of mine and was at university in Oxford at a period when there was extremely high political activism at the university, and we canvassed every staircase in support of a referendum around a central student union. There was an occupation with about 4,000, 5,000 people in one of the university buildings. There was 2 general elections in 1974, and Tony Blair shows absolutely no sign whatever of having had any interest in politics, either from the Labour point of view or the Conservative point of view or the Lib Dem point of view. Still far from Keir Starmer, who was a Pabloite when he was at university, well, at least when he was doing postgraduate work, literal supporter of the Pablo organisation. And then Blair, Tony and Cherie made a deal when they were starting at the bar that whichever of them succeeded first at the bar, the other would seek a parliamentary seat. It was a career path. And we then have Blair's extraordinarily dishonest letter to Michael Foot, holding himself out as a leftist in order to get a PPC place for the Labour Party. But I see absolutely no reason why. It's just that there was more chance of getting a PPC for somebody with Scott's background, of getting a PPC place for Labour than of getting a PPC place for the Tory party. And then, of course, he's in office 1997 to 2007, and by 2008 he's worth 12 million. Partly because I can't remember which American publishing house paid him an enormous advance for his memoirs, partly because he was paid a very large sum of money by one of the American banks. This money, and it's continued to flow in. Jack made the point, it's pretty clearly the case that Blair was paid, not during his prime ministership, but he was paid after his prime ministership for services rendered during his leadership of the Labour Party and during his prime ministership. And then the answer straightforwardly is this man is a paid agent of US capital, bits of sections of US capital. I don't think just Oracle, but he's open to payments from all sorts of different sections of US capital. And that's what he's continuing to do at the present stage, act as paid agent for US capital. Second step, the United States, this is the weird thing, because this is the United States and Europe, that Blair says, don't go back into Europe, wait until deregulation has worked wonders. It's perfectly possible that deregulation might work wonders if the United States is willing to sub up the amounts of money which were subbed up to the Thatcher administration and actually to the Blair administration. The US government approved of and agreed and leaned on the bond markets in 2000 in support of the British government bailing out the banks in the wake of the dot-com crash. And indeed, it also, there was an earlier bailout in the wake of the long-term capital management crash and the Russian debt crisis, the East Asian debt crisis. And all of these things were there was very substantial discrimination in favor of Britain and against the French and the Germans. And the war on Iraq is part of that, because the war on Iraq was precisely a sudden attack on a Western ally, which was characterized by the fact it had been buying goods from France and Germany and making contracts in euros and selling oil in yen. This was an attack in the interests of the United States, which was not in any sense, it wasn't the US as a world cop. It wasn't enforcing the general interests of imperialism. It was enforcing the interests of the United States against France, primarily against France and Germany, and secondarily against Japan. And in that context, that yes, I don't buy Paul's point that the US policy is incoherent. I don't think it's incoherent at all. The problem is just that the form of the decline of capitalism has the effect that the United States cannot impose order in the way in which the European imperialist powers were able to impose order in the late 19th century. It can't. All it can do, and it's been clear ever since 1975, is increase the amount of disorder to create Somalia, Afghanistan, Lebanon from the moment of the intervention in the Civil War onwards, Yemen, Libya, Syria. Not by any means. The operations, actually, the Khmer Rouge, the US, when the US sponsored Khmer Rouge against the pro-Vietnamese government in Cambodia, the US operations through South Africa against Angola and Mozambique in the wake of decolonization, etc., etc., etc. Or it does nothing except export destruction. By exporting destruction, it also has this. Happens to have the beneficial side effect for the United States. It intensifies the safe haven value of the dollar and causes more money to flow into United States financial markets, which helps to keep them afloat. So I think it's illusion to suppose that the US is the destructive and character of this war in Iran without getting anywhere is any more. What would be destruction for the United States is if the US Navy suffers an actual naval defeat, which it hasn't. That isn't what's in question. It's just they are up and down and up and down and playing this game of pretending to negotiate, at the moment pretending to negotiate and then pretending to threaten and then pretending to negotiate fake ceasefires, which of course the idea of fake ceasefire starts with the Israeli government and then that. Jim Cook's point I thought was an excellent one about jobs. The reality, again, the NEETS story. In essence, what this story is about is that the Blair administration, I can't remember, I don't know who actually invented the idea, but the Blair administration faked the unemployment figures. And it faked the unemployment figures by deliberately moving loads of people who were on the dole onto the sick, and created incentives for people to go onto the sick by making the dole more conditional and not making the sick conditional at the same time. So they've created, this is something which they've created purely for the purpose of fiddling the unemployment figures. And then they're saying, oh, if only we could, what we want to do now is to make the sick conditional and get the kids off the sick and make them work. But at the same time, actually, the underlying reality is still that an awful lot of jobs people can't afford to do because there's no rent control. The absence of rent control, you have to have, when I last worked it out, it was 26% of the adult benefits, the under pension age benefits bill is the cost of rent. People can't work if they can't live anywhere near the place. And it's this whole, it's just an extraordinary level of mess. But it is important that the NEETS story, this is not a story about Milburn's story about this is a terrible policy failure. It's actually, this is the consequences of your fraudulent operations and the consequences of Maggie Thatcher's fraudulent operations and the fraudulent operations of the senior members of the bar who alleged that decontrolling rent and economists who alleged that decontrolling rent would increase the supply of housing. That's it.
Mike, thank you. Yasmin, please.
Yeah. Just a couple of points. Just a warning about opening up of internet in Iran. This doesn't necessarily mean that we will get the views of ordinary Iranians, right? We know that a lot of money has been spent by Israel, by Mossad, on faking news. Now, some of these fake news will appear as if they are from Iran. So we can't trust what is being said. I've been following some of the messages from Iran. The worst ones are the ones who talk about 30,000 dead in January. We know that's a lie. That's now been proved to be a lie. It's a Mossad lie. Israel is now saying it's 60,000 people the Iranian government killed on 2 nights, 7th and 8th of January in 2026. So let us be very careful. We shouldn't believe anything we hear, even if it appears as if it comes. You can easily fake an IP address. I keep telling journalists, I keep telling newspaper people, you can fake an IP unless you are someone who can then go and use a very expensive tool in a very rich university and find out this is a fake IP, like I can. You can't do it. You can't see it. You will see it as if it's coming from Iran. The other point is to point out the Financial Times article on Iran International TV station. I have spoken on a number of occasions in this meeting, in these meetings and elsewhere, that this is basically Mossad TV. Financial Times could only follow their records in terms of banking accounts, what they've registered with the UK government finance and so on. And what they can prove is that there is a Saudi financier, Abdul Karim, who is the main figurehead. What they couldn't follow was that at some stage, Saudi Arabia sold this entity to Mossad. It's worked for 10 years. A lot of Iranians I meet, even people who are not necessarily, who are completely opposed to the Islamic government in Iran, will tell you that it has played a significant role. And Financial Times article actually agrees with this, in brainwashing Iranians to create a nostalgia about the Pahlavi era. And this is the world we live in. It's not just that wars are on a different front, as Jack said, with drones and so on, but also political propaganda is a completely different type of propaganda warfare we are facing. We have this build-up of nostalgia that has led to a demonstration where some people, there weren't many, but some people in Germany demonstrated wearing Savak, which was the old Shah's secret police, the murderous secret police, who killed so many people under torture, who tortured so many left-wingers and some religious people, but mainly left-wingers. They demonstrated as Savak supporters, right? And they wore the Savak uniform. And this is Iran International, this is Mossad creating this absolutely unbelievable fascist right-wing phenomena in Europe supporting the Pahlavi dynasty. So don't believe everything you see on, even if it says on the internet. The opening of the internet has helped us to see left-wing articles. I've seen the letter by 100 former political prisoners, former and current political prisoners of the left. Very good leaflet, statement. We have nothing to do with the US. We don't want the United States to support us. We are being imprisoned by the Islamic Republic because we defend socialism, because we are anti-imperialist. And therefore, we definitely don't want any support from the United States. A predecessor to this was a statement by Pashan, a woman, a left-wing prisoner in Evin prison. She's currently in prison, and she wrote when Rubio made a statement defending her case in prison. She said, "The last thing I want is idiots like this supporting me. I've fought my entire life against imperialism." So we have to be very careful on those. One other point on Blair's comments on AI, I think we have to accept the fact that artificial intelligence will play a significant role in the next few years in all our lives and for decades to come. But the way the US, the UK are going about it are, first of all, defeatist for their own purposes, because the kind of competitions that is currently going on with these various AIs more or less rely on the same LLM, long language models, is actually stifling their progress. And this is where China is leading, because dictatorships can force single AI development as opposed to competition. I'm not in favor of dictatorships doing this, but this commercial competition of whether ChatGPT will win from Gemini, from Grok, from Claude, from other competitors is in itself becoming a hindrance as opposed to anything that will advance AI in the long term. And the fact that Tony Blair doesn't see how capitalist AI is not only making a lot of people unemployed in many subjects, but also it's creating a situation where everyone's AI, academic work, political work, socialist contributions, left-wing contributions, but also economic work, academic work, is being used by these artificial intelligence units to actually progress their agenda. But in the long term, they use that to sell it back as a loan. I think Richard Murphy has made some comments about this, but it's actually then loaning it back for profit to ordinary civilians is a disaster. And so anyone who sees the savings or savior of capital, of current crises in plural, in what is a very terrible competition between AI firms in Western capitalist countries, is deluding himself. I would add Tony Blair to that list. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin. I can have the last word very briefly. I saw Koonsberg this morning talking to Comrade McSweeney, and I know he did a separate interview after doing the Scottish leader. So Labour is centre-left. He's advising the left, and we should take note that we need growth, because if you have growth, you can deliver the better society that we all believe in. So that would be really nice. Over to you, Jack.
I don't know if I could ask any comrades who haven't muted themselves to mute, because we're getting background noise. Okay, I will sum up. Ken raised the point, about negotiations and how long can it go on. I think, again, only guessing, that it can go on for a considerable length of time. From Iran's point of view, its population suffer. That's true. From America's point of view, Europe, Asia, China suffers. But so what? So I think we can have an extended standoff. I mean, you know, I'm only guessing. On the other hand, the fact that Trump went into the Situation Room did have me going, well, what on earth is that all about? That can only be about organizing a military strike. So my own feeling, for what it's worth, is either we have a long standoff, but within the long standoff, you can still tip over into another, you know, burst of destruction, which my argument certainly has always been cannot deliver regime change. I just cannot see how that can produce regime change. You have to have an alternative. So that's my own take on that. Is Blair close to Kemi? Well, yes, sort of ish. But in that sense, you know, I don't think we want to exaggerate the real differences between what I'd call mainstream politicians. Often, you know, what it is, it's about, to me, you know, do you play for Arsenal or do you play for Chelsea? I mean, Mike's illustrated it with Blair. They are bourgeois politicians. And so I don't take their, you know, PMQ exchanges or parliamentary exchanges as anything other than theatre. You know, they are professional politicians and they're playing for a particular side. And the side that they're actually playing for is British imperialism. So, you know, we have this performative side to it, which I think is designed to fool people, and it usually succeeds, doesn't it? But yeah, there isn't that much difference between Tony and Kemi, but is there really much difference between Kemi and Sir Keir, for example? I really don't, I don't see any fundamental divide. Paul, I actually think Paul made an interesting point here, you know, about your sort of visual model of the Cold War. And I think it's not just, to me, it doesn't just apply, Paul, to foreign policy. I think that the Cold War also produced a certain coherence in terms of domestic politics. So America promoted in Europe and in Britain what I'll call, for anything better, is right-wing social democracy. The idea that we live in an age of post-capitalism, you know, where the welfare state, capitalism brings you higher and higher living standards. Things can only get better, you know, the 1950s boom and all of that stuff. So the end of that system, yes, has seen the finish of that. But I agree with Mike, that doesn't mean we should look at what's going on now and just imagine that there is no sense to it. I think there is a sense to it. And my own take on it is precisely when it comes to foreign policy. I'm not saying that's all, but nonetheless, there is China and there's the United States. And in that sense, Tony Blair is talking sense, isn't he? You know, it's not just nonsense. I don't take the view that Tony Blair is an irrelevance. You know, the fact that he's on Trump's board of peace, it's not because he's going to bring peace to Gaza. He is an inside operator, you know, amongst amongst the, you know, circles of imperialist advisors. So he's not an irrelevance. And when he talks, you know, John, you and me can go, oh, it doesn't matter, he's prime minister from ages ago. But who's talking here? It's not just Tony Blair. That's the point, is it? You know, if he's an agent of America, then it's America that's talking. And although it's phrased in the essay, by the way, is only 5,000 words. It's not obscure. You can just look it up, read it. It doesn't take you long. But it's, to me, it's clearly written by Tony Blair. Might have had a committee, but this is Tony Blair. But basically what he's arguing is American foreign policy and domestic policy. This is what Britain should do in the interests of the United States. So I think it does matter. If the United States was an irrelevance internationally and for Britain, then dismiss Tony Blair. So I think we should treat it more seriously. It doesn't mean it's, you know, the word from the Messiah, that, you know, anything like that. But I think, you know, we should, it's worthwhile a read. And as I said, I think some of it's delusional, some of it's nonsense. But if we're right, and this reflects in some indirect way US interests and US policy, which I think does exist, which has a coherence, then we ought to treat. That's why I thought it was worthwhile to use his document, his essay, as a springboard in terms of today's discussion. In terms of what Pam brings up, well, I wish the comrades well in their socialist federation. I mean, we could be part of it, but it does strike me as the wreckage, and what we've had is the failure of your party. So we still have some people in your party, some people out of it, but in general, I think all comrades there just display utter incoherence. If you want your model as the DSA in America, God help you. There you are, attached to a bourgeois party. If that's the model for socialists to aspire to, you know, I'm sorry, I don't. I'm for, we are for, in America, we are for a split by the DSA from the Democrat Party. We don't view that as a strength. We view that as a fundamental weakness. So there has to be a split in the same way that the working class split from liberalism. I'm talking about the trade union movement, but obviously not to found laborism, which is liberalism in exile, but a genuine socialist project. So the DSA has the word socialist in its title, but it's not a socialist organization. What they mean by socialism in the United States is the NHS. You know, it's a Europe, but Europe is socialist, or something along those lines. So anyway, so no, I don't think the DSA is a model to aspire to. Quite the opposite. To me, the model to aspire to is classic social democracy, and my favorite example of that is the Bolshevik Party. So that's my, not, you know, in terms of oh, we've got to have you know, printing in Switzerland or something like that, but nonetheless, what we want is something like the Bolsheviks, that is carrying out a political war against opportunism. Isn't some federation of let's all stick together and let's all be friends with social democrats and Marxists. To me, this is a swamp. So we need a solidly programmatically based party, and comrades who fudge on program, fudge on organization, I think are part of the problem, as opposed to being part of the solution. And I've heard comrades from this grouping who think that they can arrive at socialism through fighting around, you know, food prices or bus fares, you know, or betting, you know, banning betting shops or anything that's supposedly popular. I think that this is delusional. And so, you know, I wish the comrades well, but I don't rate their chances. And I think that we're dealing with the wreckage of a project, not a new project that's worth anything. I agree with Mike. I don't buy it. It's Tony Blair's schooling. I mean, if only it wasn't because of Mrs. Hitler and Mrs. Hitler, you know, Adolf would have been a well-adjusted, you know, all the Kaiser, you know, we hear all these, you know, half-baked psychological explanation. If only Stalin's dad had been not a drunk. I'm sure it's right that, you know, our parents, what was the phrase? Our parents fuck us up. I'm sure that's true, but I don't buy. It's no, you know, we don't ignore psychology. Of course we don't, but we do look at the interests of classes, and we do look at the interests of states, and individuals attach themselves to classes and serve classes. And that's our tragedy at the present time, that Marxism has been separated from the mass movement of the working class. And that's our task, is to connect with the mass of the working class, and through that, the working class can act as the liberator of humanity and the savior of humanity from climate change, nuclear war, and all the other threats that face us. Ben raises the question of our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is to oppose our own ruling class. That's the first and foremost. That's not just a neat formulation. But yes, of course, we actually have raised the question, Ben, certainly in my articles, and no one's come out and objected. I have raised the question of self-determination for the Russian majority in the east of Ukraine. Not necessarily the 5 oblasts, Crimea and the other 4 annexed oblasts, but clearly there's a national question there. The key question to us, though, is that all of that has been overlaid by the rivalry of the United States, I would argue ultimately with China and Russia. And if we look at it in the context of 2014, the Maidan coup. So we don't just look at it as little Ukraine versus big bully Russia. But of course, we have democratic demands on both sides. That includes Russia, that includes Ukraine. But crucially, it has to be put in a global context. And we certainly shouldn't be advising this is what the British government should be doing. We need a working class foreign policy, not the working class as acting as advisors to Sir Keir, or is Tony a knight yet? I can't remember. But anyway, Blair and Badenoch and all the rest of it. Okay. What Yasmin was saying is interesting, and I, of course, readily accept what she's saying, but nonetheless, she can talk in Farsi now over the internet to our comrades in Iran. And that's really what I'm talking about. And I think that's an important change, a positive change. And again, of course, we shouldn't believe just because it comes from Iran that it's the truth. I mean, I think it's obvious, a bit like saying you must believe everything that comes from Britain because it's from British people. Well, precisely, British people come out with all the lies of the bourgeoisie, and they absorb it, don't they? And that's going to be true in Iran, either from the regime itself domestically or its enemies. And so how many times, I mean, I travel by bus in London, I travel by train, or I go to pubs and I listen to people come out with the headlines of the Daily Mirror or the Sun from yesterday. And, I recognize it. So it doesn't mean I believe it, but it's still worthwhile having that voice. And so that's really what I'm pointing to. It is an important change that the internet now has been opened. It also allows us to communicate in. So that's really what I'm saying. So no, of course we shouldn't say, if someone in Iran, in inverted commas, is saying there were 60,000 deaths, no, there was 100, doesn't mean it's true. They might believe it, or they might be a bot. So, but we take the same view, don't we, with everything that comes our way. And we certainly know when it comes to war, we know, I don't know who invented the phrase, but it's true. The first casualty of war is the truth. And although we're dealing with the new Yasmin, that's an old truth. And so, what we heard in World War I about nuns and what we heard in, it goes back, doesn't it? I mean, we've had an article in this week's paper about the Punic Wars and Athens and Sparta. I do remember reading Euclides, who put speeches into the mouths of Spartan generals and Athenians. Doesn't mean that he's there taking notes. This is a version of history, even though he's credited with being the world's first historian. It's the first world historian. He's still making up speeches. This is the speech they ought to have made. This is a speech I think they should have made. So we need to take all of this, taking into account interests, class interests, national interests. And yes, nowadays, it's even easier to fool us than it was So we need a discriminating mind. We need precisely openness, because that will allow us, precisely as my argument was on this, I think, Russian drone that hit Romania. We precisely need openness to examine, was that true? What is my case reasonable? Is it nonsense? So we need debate, we need facts, and we will sort it. We will sort it out. Journalism is famously, the first draft of history, and that's all I'm doing today. First draft, not definitive. This is just my view. This is my assessment. This is my balance, just like my feeling, nothing more. That this no peace but no war can drag on for months. I'm not going to talk about the primaries and does Trump take, I think he does take them seriously, by the way. I think he takes them seriously that he could ban them. But that one is a different subject entirely. So we'll leave that for another week. Thank you, Stan.
Yes, well, wars are easier to start than they are to finish, evidently. And of course, Trump's a man of peace. He wishes he could finish it. Okay, comrades, next week, 5 o'clock. And